You might think I spend hours upon hours coming up with video ideas. Well, actually, I do that for a lot of my videos, but not for this video. Last week, over the course of 2 days, I had meetings with 4 different buyers who entirely on their own asked me if I had heard about the property tax lawsuit with Mitch Vexler. So I'm thinking, hey, if 4 different people are asking me about this, I need to hit research mode and check it out. So I went to Mitch Vexler's website and I read every court filing and amicus brief, and there's a lot there. And I'm telling you, after reading it, it's really not wrong. In fact, the most sobering thing is that the tax appraisal districts and school districts are so intertwined that they kind of have to do what they're doing. But okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So first things first, Vexler has basically 2 core arenas. The first is that property taxes are unconstitutional at a national level. And then secondly, that there's rampant fraud at the local level. So in regard to the national level, the claim is that property taxes are unconstitutional because it is a tax on unrealized gain. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, in Vexler's amicus brief, he explains market value is taxation on unrealized gains, which is prohibited under the 16th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, if you're not familiar with the 16th Amendment, basically, the 16th Amendment granted Congress the power to tax incomes from whatever source derived. Vexler continues saying that since the ratification of the 16th Amendment, the U.S. Supreme Court has consistently interpreted income as referring to amounts that the taxpayer realizes in a particular accounting period. In other words, the 16th Amendment is saying that in order to have tax, you have to have income first. And there's a lot of truth to that in how our taxation system works. I mean, think about when you own stock. You aren't taxed if it goes up in value. Like, it can go up in value year after year, and you're not taxed on it until you sell. However, with property taxes, you're taxed as if you've sold it year after year after year. There's no realized gain with each annual tax. So he has a very valid point here. Okay, let's get into the fraud of the individual appraisal and school districts though, because this is really where it hits the pocketbook. Now, if you're one of our clients, or if you've watched any of my videos, you know I put a huge emphasis on always getting a comparative market analysis and making sure the data is accurate. Well, a lot of what Mitch Vexler is going to talk about is appraisals that are done by these appraisal districts. So as we get into that, okay, it'll be helpful for you to know and just kind of have that in mind that an appraisal is simply a more formal version of a market analysis. For example, appraisals have to meet guidelines of the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Fannie Mae also has specific rules about how a home is to be measured since value is estimated by the square foot. Appraisers will typically use a software program where nothing is calculated by hand. After their research is done, they enter the comparable sales, and then the software does the math based on various adjustments. And really, that's how it should be. Obtaining an opinion of value should be incredibly detailed, objective, and data dependent so that you can trust it. But here's the thing, and a point Mitch Vexler makes again and again, many of these appraisal districts aren't doing that. They're working outside standard guidelines, and the appraisals lack accuracy and objective data. And I will tell you, as I was reading this, okay, all these memories of me protesting taxes here decade after decade were coming back to me. And it was just really hitting me the many ways the appraisal districts violated these standard guidelines time and time again. In his amicus brief, Vexler hones in on the Denton Central Appraisal District a lot, but much of what he was encountering, I have experienced personally at the Dallas Central Appraisal District too. He has hard documentation of all of this too. He is not just making it up. So let me show you everything he shares regarding the Denton Central Appraisal District. He reports that PAX Appraisal is the primary software used by DCAD to conduct property appraisals for Denton County. It is appropriate that they use software too, because in Article 8, Section 1A of the Texas Constitution, where it's discussing valuation of certain real property for tax purposes, it states that taxation shall be equal and uniform. Now, think about why an objective software system would be vital in that goal of being equal and uniform. And while you're at it, also think about the fact that being equal and uniform kind of goes hand in hand with accuracy. After giving that some thought, you should be appropriately shocked to hear that according to Vexler's criminal complaint, Denton CAD has admitted to removing homes from the PACS system and using Excel to try to figure out values manually. Vexler provides a transcript with minutes from a board meeting Denton CAD had on October 12, 2023 to prove this. Here's a statement about it. In the October 12, 2023 DCAD Board of Directors meeting, Deputy Chief Appraiser Chris Luttrell, Deputy Chief Appraiser Gene Ashlock, and Chief Appraiser Don Spencer tell the board they perform software workarounds and are manipulating the property tax value data. Then it goes on to mention specific references to the meeting, including the exact minutes each person spoke. Deputy Chief Appraiser Chris Luttrell is quoted as saying, "There's a lot of workarounds that have to happen with our current software program." And Deputy Chief Appraiser Gene Ashlock says, DCAD is addressing software issues outside of the software system because it cannot provide the correct value info for tax billing. Employee Rebecca has to go in and correct data on the back end. She also says that their employee has taught herself, really. She has kind of had to how to do things in the database. Okay, so this is not sounding like the best formula to create accuracy by a long shot. There's still more though. Chief Appraiser Don Spencer comments that Rebecca is running the process outside of the software, and that it is unfortunate because what she's having to do is pull data out of the system, manipulate the data, and then put it back into the system. Then he says that over 60,000 properties are being corrected outside of the software by Rebecca. All right, 60,000 properties by one person. All right, think about how huge a margin of error there is in such an amount of data retraction, doing it all without software and then re-entering the results. Tax assessor collector Michelle French comments on this exact thing. She discusses the complexity of Rebecca's work in Excel with these records and that the potential for any type of error just exponentially explodes. To the extent that these are actual minutes and direct quotes from a meeting, I'm gonna have to agree with Vexler here. They have one person completing 60,000 property valuations, and she's not using software to ensure that it's equal and uniform. Now, remember I mentioned that the Texas Constitution says taxation has to be equal and uniform, but something you need to know is the Texas Comptroller requires an even higher standard. Here's what it says. Tax Code Section 23.01 requires that appraisal districts comply with the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice if using mass appraisal, and use the same appraisal methods and techniques when appraising the same or similar kinds of property. Keeping in mind the way Denton CAD was completing their appraisals based on their own admission, let's take a peek at the use PAP that they're required to comply with and see how it compares. All right, so here are some of the requirements. Okay, you ready? An appraiser must determine that he or she can perform the assignment competently. Competency requires the knowledge and experience to complete the assignment competently. Now, if their employee Rebecca is in there teaching herself and just sort of figuring it out, all right, first of all, she shouldn't have even started. You aren't supposed to be completing appraisals until after you have the competence. And secondly, where is the standard that she has the competence? Again, we have Gene Ashlock saying Rebecca taught herself, so there's no evaluation and no accountability. Another USPAP standard is they must employ those recognized methods and techniques that are necessary to produce a credible appraisal. They must not commit a substantial error of omission or commission that significantly affects an appraisal, and they must not render appraisal services in a careless or negligent manner. Now, I've only mentioned a few of the USPAP violations, but Vexler lists several pages in his criminal complaint. And here's one that's a real biggie. All right, an appraiser must not agree to perform an assignment that is contingent on any of the following: the reporting of a predetermined result, a direction in assignment result that favors the cause of the client, or the attainment of a stipulated result. Now you might wonder why that's relevant, right? Okay, why is that one a biggie? All right, well, let's talk about who collects the lion's share of property taxes, which is the school districts. Every year, school districts have to submit a budget. Well, according to Vexler, what ends up happening is they set their budget and then they have to make the taxes meet that budget. So they're forecasting how much it has to be before they ever look at comparable sales. So basically, our taxes are not solely based on the value of our homes as they should be, right? They are at least partially based on the predetermined budget needs of the local school district. Now, something to keep in mind is school districts have their regular budget, of course, but they also have large budget. Like some are as large as building stadiums, but it could also be things like replacing old school buses. And for that, the government requires bonds, all right, for these kinds of large projects. And bonds are a debt, and the government has rules about how much bond debt a school district can take. For example, in school districts with 2,000 to 3,500 students, there is a 25% cap based on the income they received from ad valorem taxes. Section 45.001 of the Texas Education Code states a district may not issue bonds in an amount greater than the greater of 25% of the sum of the principal amount of all district debt payable from ad valorem taxes that is outstanding at the time the bonds are issued, and the principal amount of all bonds payable from ad valorem taxes that have been authorized but not issued. So basically, it benefits the school for the values to be higher because they have to be able to repay their bond debt. Now, let's also consider if a school district wants a new stadium for their high school and they need to issue bonds to pay for it. Well, they are limited by their budget and debt restrictions as to how many bonds they can issue. If they're already at 25%, they can't raise any additional funds through bonds unless their ad valorem taxes go up. That's not stopping some of these school districts though. Vexler discusses school districts getting over their heads in debt because they use inflated home values to support them being able to raise more bonds. When Vexler refers to bond fraud in his publications, okay, this is part of what he's referring to. You end up with these school districts saddled with debt. All right, so are you beginning to see that the districts can't let the taxes go down? Therein lies this conflict of interest of what comes first, the budget or property taxes, and oops, now we need property tax revenue to be a certain amount to pay off all of this debt and support new debt. I mentioned in the beginning that the appraisal districts and the school districts are intertwined, and I hope you can see now how that would be true. With the school districts' budgets coming first, the appraisals are forced to follow and comply with the necessary amount. Now, if you're skeptical right now, okay, get ready because I'm going to give you some examples. First off, Vexler includes in his lawsuit that Denton County is guilty of falsifying tax rolls to the comptroller's office. He explains that appraisal districts are required to certify their tax rolls to the Texas Comptroller's office that the value for 95% of the respective district's tax base has been fully resolved by July 25. Vexler further explains that DCAD must put out two sets of numbers: what is certified or complete and final, and what is still under review. The problem with Denton County, according to Vexler, is that the initial notice values resulted in grossly inflated values, which led to a surge of Denton County property owners protesting property values with the Appraisal Review Board. Now, revisiting the fact that we have employee Rebecca doing 60,000 appraisals by hand outside of any software, manipulating the data, are we even remotely surprised that a record number of owners are protesting their taxes? At any rate, Denton County couldn't get it done, but if they can't get it done, it's not the end of the world. Vexler explains that if a property is still under review, then DCAD is bound by law to use the prior year's valuation. The chief appraiser at the time, Hope McClure, she didn't go that route though, all right? They certainly could have, but it would have meant lower overall revenues, and of course they couldn't have that. So wouldn't you know it, they chose to falsify the tax roll certification by moving the status of anywhere between 8,000 and 10,000 unresolved properties to be resolved. They continue. After certifying the tax rolls to the comptroller's office, McClure and Spencer then redesignated those properties as unresolved. Now I'm going to tell you, when I first read this, I was like, well, why would they do that? Like, why is that such a big deal? But as I continued reading about the school districts and the limitations on them issuing bonds, I began realizing why the county would want to overstate their revenue. So we have fraud in falsifying tax rolls in 2023. Again, fully documented. But now let's talk about Aubrey ISD. In his publications, Vexler references real estate tax targeting of municipalities, including Pilot Point, Sanger, Aubrey, chart 60% higher than Denton County average. He goes on to explain that as recently as 2024, tax values in Aubrey ISD rose 60% more than those in Denton County overall. As evidence, he references the February 15th, 2024 board meeting where Chief Appraiser Don Spencer praises himself and his team for getting the values where they needed to be, particularly the 3 school districts that had been flagged as invalid in 2021 and 2022 and passed the 2023 property value study by the state. So what are they doing here? Well, the long short of it is if they can't get values to a certain point, it could affect state funding. So again, in complete violation of USPAP, they start with a target amount in mind and they back into it to make it work. So I hope you heard exactly what the chief appraiser said there. Getting the values where they needed to be. And this is not Vexler making this up, all right? This is the Denton chief appraiser saying that. In the meeting, the same chief appraiser, Don Spencer, explains that the valuations for the area of these ISDs in northern Denton County were hit harder than other areas. We really raised the values to try to get to what we can see as market value. And I feel confident that we're going to get back in. So we have Denton County, we have Aubrey ISD, but Vexler isn't alone in his experiences. Jeff Mashburn also filed a criminal complaint against Itasca ISD and the Hill Central Appraisal District. And here we go again with the falsifying of the tax records. Jeff Mashburn reports in 2024, HCAD, through its chief appraiser at the time, Mike McKibben, and officers of HCAD falsified the tax rolls to the comptroller's office. There is so much in this lawsuit against Itasca ISD, but one thing that really stood out is how they approached bonds. Mashburn states that the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to put forward a bond referendum in the amount of $34 million. The dollar amount of the proposed bond referendum exceeds the bond capacity cap of 25% as stated in the Texas Education Code by a factor of 17 times the allowed amount. Okay, so we're talking 17 times. In this case, according to Mashburn, not only are they falsifying their tax rolls, they're issuing bonds in complete disregard to the Texas Education Code mandates. So Vexler explains all of these blatant examples of fraud and then backs it up with evidence after evidence after evidence. And it's all within a system that I already knew was seriously flawed from my perspective as a realtor. And the real irony was that I had literally just published a video on all the abuses I see that don't even include any of these. Now, if you're interested in digging in more, you might want to check that video out. You can click on it right here. In the meantime, Wendy out.